All right, welcome in for week 4 of Seek, Gather, Create. I've got my trusty gratitude journal out. I have a book here to prop it up one side because it is getting to the end of this little beauty. And I listed all the prompts, all the items that we have to seek and gather. So the letter M, I pulled out my drawer of letters in the N's and M's and N's. I also pulled out a Carolyn Doobie Stencil Girl stencil with the Jumbo Vintage to use the M if I wanted to. Let's see. Mustard was one of the items, and so I pulled out some mustard seed ink. I also pulled out some yellow ochre, which is kind of like mustardy colored, maybe a little darker. I also pulled out some papers that are kind of have some mustard color to it. And then it was shells. So I was looking for shells. I got tons of shells. I got a whole jar of shells, and I ended up having some that had some yellow in them that were more on the flat side. So I was kind of excited about that. So I pulled these out and have them set aside. And then, I don't know, my friend Crafty Hope sent me some fabric with stitches in it a while ago. And I saved them, and I went to go look for the one that I was thinking of that she had stitched on it. It was like a piece like this big. I couldn't find it, but I have fabric bits like this stashed in many places, so I'll have to keep looking for it. But I did find this one that had stitches on it. Plus I could also stitch anywhere in here. So I don't know what I'm gonna do with all these things, but I have gathered them up and I'm gonna get started. And I think the first thing I'm going to do is do some collage work using the paper that I found that had that like mustard color, some accent maybe, I don't know, and then there's some pop of color here. We'll see what I use. I'm not positive. But that's where I'm thinking about getting started. So yeah, here we are. Let's get into it. All right, so I'm getting this paper glued down using my TCW matte medium gel. This paper is some underpaper that's been put away for a while, and I've found it because it was in the colors I wanted to use. And then the other piece that I end up using is a gel print that was just one of those off prints that I didn't really much care for, but in pieces it really adds a lot of wonderful texture, and it was also in the colors that I wanted to use. So I get this all glued down, and that's where I'm starting. I have often wondered if she'd go and jump the fence. Will she keep on moving onward or stay in what could have been? Broke my arm in December. We were running for the thrill. You turned in the canyon to the snowbank where I fell. Even still, I remember knowing she could feel it too. Was a mutual arrangement, we both knew what to do. She had a star on her forehead that was easy to find. When I let down her bridle, saw into her hazel eyes. We had a deep understanding,
Never had to use a bit. Was a mutual arrangement and an honest respect. Can she walk in the fire? Can she run in the rain? Can she make it up the mountainside? Can she make it down again? I have often wondered if she'll go and jump the fence. Will she keep on moving onward or stay in what could have been? Will she keep on moving onward or stay in what could have been? Rusty red on her shoulder, I was cleaning her shoe when it clicked on the trot over in the bright morning dew. We brushed and we braided dandelions and chewed. It was a mutual arrangement we both saw into.
So I'm going to get all that excess paper that's over the edges trimmed down, and then I'm just going to dive right in to using the M stencil. That's actually a vintage, a large, I think it's actually called jumbo vintage text. And I'm going to push through it some DIY'd, made by me sand paste. I'll have a link down to that. A link down in the description box to the actual video. Plus there'll be a link up in the corner. And I'm gonna get that pushed through the stencil and get it good and dry. I do let this dry naturally and then come back to it.
I remember knowing she could feel it too. Was a mutual arrangement, we both knew what to do. She had a star on her forehead that was easy to find when I let down her brush.
And as I'm pushing this sand paste through the stencil, I'm really trying to get multiple levels. So some areas that are thicker than others, some of these areas that I'm putting the letter M, some of them are as a whole thicker than others. Like the last one I do is very thick. It took that one quite a while to dry. I think it was about probably about an hour. I'm in Arizona and we're really dry, so what feels like forever to me is usually not as long as it would take somebody in let's say a high humidity area. So yeah.
Will she keep on moving onward or stay in what could have been? Will she keep on moving onward or stay in what could have been?
So the first thing I wanted to tackle was how these are just disappearing into the background, which I knew would happen because it's sand paste and the base of sand paste is matte gel medium, which is translucent or clear in some cases. Some of this is very thick, so you can actually see the sand coming through. So I wanted to make them pop a little bit, so I chose to pull in a Posca pen in black and kind of traced around the letter really sketchily, and then came in with my my sprayer bottle. What this does is it makes this absolutely fantastic. It just pulls into the recesses and bumps of that sand paste and makes this awesome texture. Plus it catches any of the layers of texture from the background and course, I used thin paper, so it's really wrinkly and awesome. So that really, I knew that that was going to really draw me into this. So that's why I chose to go with the Posca pen. An alternative that would have been really nice is I could have used a Stabilo All pencil, but I chose not to because I knew later on I felt like I was going to be coming in with some other color over this, and I didn't want to risk the chance that the that the Stabilo All would run at all. And because I dried that Posca pen, I can then come in with this reinker bottle with the mustard seed Distress Oxide ink in here, which is water soluble. So if I go over that with a spray bottle, I'm not going to have it mixing with the black that I used initially because it was the Posca pen, and once it's dry, it won't move again. It is not water soluble once it's been dried. And to be honest, after I get the mustard seed Distress Oxide ink where I want it, the consistency and the amount that's showing on the letter and running off, etc., I do go over those letter M's because I felt like I was done. I do go over them with some spray fixative to deter. It won't stop that Distress Oxide. If it got wet, it is going to move again, but it deters it from doing so. So I usually use a little bit of spray fixative over each of those. I cut that out because I do have to go outside to use that because it is very fumey. I do not know where I found this door. I have had it for a very long time, but I knew when I was doing those M's, I kept having these words from my childhood come up, and you'll get that once you see the quote or the text that I put on this page. It needed to have a door. And I remembered this little yellow door and searched for it. I think I spent 30 minutes alone trying to find this little door. So it puts Seek, Gather, Create to a whole new meaning.
Arrangement we both saw into.
So I previewed that little stitched piece of fabric and decided that I wanted to integrate that door a little bit more. So I'm going to come in with some gesso. And I know that that gesso is going to kind of mix with that Distress Oxide reinker that I had put down because I had bled it out, and I only used the fixative over the letter M's. So I knew it would mix and kind of tinge that gesso with some of that yellow, and it would nicely bring it in. Plus, I love when I'm working with gesso, especially with lots of texture on the page, I love to do what I call a dry brush with my finger and catch some of that texture with that highlight of gesso. And that's exactly what I'm going to come in here and do.
Knowing she could feel it too. Was a mutual arrangement, we both knew what to do. She had a star.
This is a mustard seed plant in flower, in its flower state, and I thought this would be really nice and kind of cute and appropriate to have close to this doorway. So I'm just kind of creating these little features around the doorway. And so I'm fussy cutting this out. I cut out most of that footage because, you know, fussy cutting's pretty boring. And I'm gonna get this placed.
Can she walk in the fire? Can she run in the rain? Can she make it up the mountainside? Can she make it down again?
And I'm gonna do the same with these little shells that I had sought out earlier to use for this layout.
And onward or staying what could have been. Will she keep on moving onward or staying what could have been? Rusty red on her shoulder. I was cleaning her shoe when it clicked on the trot over in the bright morning dew. We brushed and we braided dandelions and chewed. It was a mutual.
So the words that I chose to use, and what I did was I took a piece of that same paper I had left over from collaging in the background, and I typed out on my vintage Smith Corona, Mr. Mustard with the shell behind the yellow door. And I don't know if you know what that's from, but if you do, comment down below. It is a game that I used to love to play with my family when I was a kid. I'm going to use some archival distress ink around the text, and then I'm going to go ahead and pop it up using some foam tape just so I can do an extra shadow underneath it, just to make it really stand off this page.
Even still, I remember knowing she could feel it too. Was a mutual arrangement, we both knew what to do. She had a star on her forehead that was easy to find. When I let down her bridle, saw into her hazel eyes. We had a deep understanding, never had to use a bit. Was a mutual arrangement and an honest respect. Can she walk in the fire? Can she run in the rain? Can she make it up the mountainside? Can she make it down again? I have often wondered if she'll go and jump the fence. Will she keep on moving onward or stay in what could have been? Will she keep on